There are lots of really good businessmen in the wrestling world, and I'm not just talking about the likes of Vince McMahon. Often it's the wrestlers too who are looking to squeeze as much out of the industry as they can, and once a wrestler has proven that they are a bankable superstar, then they really can start upping their demands and getting into the good stuff in terms of pay and privileges when it comes to their wrestling contracts. In this video we're going to look at some crazy contract requests that were actually granted to spoiled superstars. Aside from Triple H's contract of marriage to Stephanie McMahon, which has worked out very well for him in recent months now that Vince has retired, there are other contracts Triple H has made good on in his career. In the lead up to the release of the WWE SmackDown vs Raw 2009 video game, a memo was leaked containing a directive to news outlets who were previewing the game at the time. That memo specifically mentioned, amongst other things, that blood was not allowed to be showed in screenshots and they weren't allowed to show hard weapon shots. But there was one other caveat that caught everybody's eye. The memo also mentioned that Triple H's video game character was not allowed to look weak in any game material. So Triple H was not allowed to be shown losing or defeated or in a defenseless position in any of the screenshots. No other wrestlers on the game's roster came with this kind of caveat, just Triple H. Sounds like 2009 Triple H was a little bit insecure. Mid-1990s WCW was known as the place the big boys played, and the big boys picked up big paychecks. With almost unlimited access to Ted Turner's massive checkbook, Eric Bischoff raided WWE for their superstars by sending them almost irresistible offers of guaranteed money. A famous example of Bischoff's generosity was the offers made to Scott Hall and Kevin Nash to jump ship and make life-changing money in 1996. Not only was the money huge, but the bonuses were sweet too, with fewer dates a year than with WWE. Evidently, Scott Hall knew which side his bread was buttered on, and he even pushed for more with his so-called favoured nations clause. Hall must have seen the dollar signs on top of dollar signs when he thought of this one. It meant that Hall would get his agreed pay, however, if any other wrestler was signed to more money than him, his pay would be increased too, to be in line with theirs. Take 1997 for example. Hall's take-home amount was $669,486, and yet in 1998 Hall's total pay increased massively to over $1,423,000. That had a lot to do with Bret Hart signing a massive contract with WCW at the end of 1997 and therefore pushing his own money up. What's good for the goose is also good for Big Sexy, as Kevin Nash also took advantage of the same clause when he signed. A sign that Eric Bischoff needed to leave his job as head booker of WCW came around the time that he did a deal with the rock band Kiss. In hopes of turning WCW's declining ratings and ailing fortunes around, Bischoff cut a deal with the rock band for them to perform live on Nitro, and also to have lots of tie-in material related to the glam rockers elsewhere in WCW, and so the creation of the Kiss Demon character, and it was a short-sighted decision to say the least. Bischoff came up with the character as an extension of the band's members, specifically Gene Simmons, as the Kiss Demon character would be wearing Simmons makeup. Even worse, it was promised that the character would be involved in at least one pay-per-view main event. The Kiss concert on Nitro scored one of the show's lowest ratings ever, and the fans were mostly confused as to the Demon character. Even fans of the band must have been scratching their heads. As Bischoff left the scene in 1999, the main event contract with the Kiss Demon was still in place. In the end, the Kiss Demon faced The Wall at Super Brawl 2000 in what was dubbed a special main event that just happened to occur in the middle of the show. Randy Savage made the leap to WCW in 1994 for a nice guaranteed contract after Vince McMahon had decided he didn't want Savage to wrestle anymore. Savage was unhappy with his reduced role as a commentator in WWE and was pleased with Eric Bischoff's large contract and willingness to allow Savage to wrestle, so he signed on the dotted line. Savage quickly recognised that WCW was a totally different playing field compared to WWE, and he wanted to get his brother, Lanny Poffo, on the gravy train too. Poffo was best known as playing the Genius in WWE, but he'd fallen out of favour with McMahon in 1992, and so he signed with WCW in 1995, hoping to debut under the Gorgeous George gimmick which Savage had recently purchased the rights to. And so Poffo hit the gym hard and even bleached his hair blonde in anticipation of taking up the gimmick on WCW TV. However, it wasn't to be. In a rather sad turn of events, Poffo sat on the sidelines calling WCW every day for an update with no response. As Poffo sat at home, he continued to collect WCW's massive paycheck despite doing absolutely nothing for the company. Considering the huge depth of WCW's roster at the time, you've got to wonder why a talented veteran like Poffo with an existing gimmick was never utilised. Just another case of Bischoff wasting Ted Turner's money in the mid-90s. As we've seen multiple times on this list already, WCW really was the place for wrestlers to make hay, and nobody seemed to object, especially during those white-hot years of 1996 to 1998. Chris Jericho is one of wrestling's masters of reinvention and character work, and we saw that right from his first foray into the mainstream in 1996. Realising the importance of setting himself apart from the pack in any way possible, Jericho employed trucker Ralphus to accompany him to the ring as his personal security. For most, Ralphus is a hilarious footnote to Jericho's time in WCW's Cruiserweight division, but it turns out he was also a shrewd businessman. According to Jericho himself, Ralphus started showing up backstage at house shows demanding that he was made part of the show. Everyone scoffed when Ralphus announced that he was going to try and get a proper contract out of WCW for his appearances as Jericho's security chief. Incredibly, Ralphus bagged himself a contract worth $78,000 a year. Good lad. One of the catalysts for the Montreal Screwjob is the often forgotten mega contract that Vince McMahon offered Bret Hart to try and get him to stay with WWE in 1996. What with Eric Bischoff breathing down his neck, McMahon must have temporarily lost his mind when he wrote Hart a 20-year contract for what was reportedly worth $1 million a year. Of course, Hart signed the contract along with a creative control clause that said that he could decide how he would leave the company if he ever decided to. A couple of problems popped up for McMahon later down the line. First, business was in the toilet, and it didn't take long for McMahon to realise that he couldn't afford to pay Hart the $1 million a year that he promised him, and so McMahon talked Hart into reconsidering WCW's $2.6 million per year offer. Hart took the tough decision to leave WWE and sign with WCW, but the second problem reared its head on that infamous night in Montreal after promises about creative had been made. I'm sure you know where the story goes from there. We all know how much Vince McMahon loved Brock Lesnar. The booking spoke for itself. In fact, McMahon loved Lesnar so much he was willing to totally ignore one of WWE's most important directives for him. Section 17 of WWE's wellness policy states that this policy, as it may be amended from time to time, is applicable to and binding upon all WWE talent under contract to WWE who regularly perform in-ring services as a professional sports entertainer, WWE talent. This is a very sensible part of the wellness policy, a policy that was produced considering all of the wrestlers who kept on dying in the mid-2000s. Lesnar was specifically not included in this policy. In 2012, Lesnar was banished from UFC after failing a drugs test. Lesnar was allegedly taking performance-enhancing drugs, and Dana White was having none of it. Luckily, WWE's wellness policy was worded perfectly to allow the beast incarnate to simply bypass the drugs test, thanks to the word regularly in the definition. Well, if you know Lesnar's career in WWE, you can hardly call his appearances regular. The Ultimate Warrior seemed to lose his mind in July of 1991 as he laid a bunch of demands at the feet of Vince McMahon in a furious letter. The letter to McMahon stated that Warrior wanted what Hulk Hogan was getting, including an additional $550,000 for performing at WrestleMania 7, wanting a limited number of working days per month, a bigger cut of the merchandising money, and his travel and hotels to be paid for. It was made clear in his letter that if his demands weren't met, then he wouldn't appear as advertised at SummerSlam that year. McMahon had to agree to the terms in the short term just to get Warrior to wrestle the advertised main event match, but as soon as Warrior came backstage, McMahon immediately suspended him. For the Ultimate Warrior, it was the beginning of the end of his WWE career. Whatever you think of Old Man Terry, he's clearly a master businessman, absolutely determined to wring every cent out of his 80s popularity right into the 1990s. The contract he signed with WCW in 1998 is almost mind-boggling to look at. The contract was leaked online a few years ago and goes into the details of Hogan's wages. First off, Hogan was awarded a $2 million signing bonus, which was just a big thank you from WCW to Hogan for taking the time to pick up the pen and put it to the paper. Next, Hogan was to be paid 25% of the ticket revenue made during any Nitro or Thunder event he appeared on, with a minimum cut of $25,000. I mean, when they were drawing 3,000 fans for an episode of Nitro towards the end, I bet WCW were losing ticket money having to pay Hogan that downside. Hogan was paid $20,000 every single month for being associated with the NWO, and then Hogan was literally handed 15% of all pay-per-view sales that he took part in, with $675,000 being the minimum take-home amount for him. And finally, remember when I mentioned merchandising? Well, Hogan set it up to ensure that he received 50% of the profits WCW made by selling any merchandise related to him. And can you believe WCW ended up going under? Incredible.